What do we really know about the world of Westeros? For years, Game of Thrones fans have dived deep into the lore, unraveling the layers of stories, histories, and hidden mysteries that George R.R. Martin created. But the show? It left us with questions, big ones. What happened behind the scenes? What pieces of the puzzle are still missing? And perhaps most intriguingly, what if some of the most shocking moments weren't what they seemed at all? You see, for every answer we thought we had, there's a fan theory waiting to shake things up. Some theories challenge everything we believe about the Starks, Lannisters, and Targaryens. Others reimagine the White Walkers as more than just the villains we loved to hate. And some? They suggest that the fate of the Seven Kingdoms may not have been as random as we once thought. We'll explore them all, from the whispers of Bran's connection to the Three-Eyed Raven, to the eerie possibility that Daemon Targaryen has more in common with the Night King than we realize. Each theory opens a new door to a world we thought we knew. Let's start at the beginning. Because in Westeros, nothing is ever quite as it seems. Daemon Targaryen is a central figure from House of the Dragon known for many things. His mastery over dragons, his ruthless ambition, and his unrelenting desire for power. These traits, coupled with his striking physical similarities to the Night King, have sparked a theory that suggests Daemon and the Night King are one and the same. A man who may have been seduced not just by fire, but also by the cold, dark promises of immortality. Could it be that Daemon Targaryen, instead of succumbing to the inevitability of death, sought out a way to cheat it, transforming into the leader of the White Walkers? It's a theory that both chills and intrigues. Daemon's deep connection to dragons is well known. His bond with Caraxes, the blood-red beast he rode into battle, was a testament to the Targaryens' unique relationship with these creatures. Dragons were more than weapons for House Targaryen. They were extensions of their power, symbols of their dominance over men, land, and to some extent, even time itself. Yet for all his power, Daemon was still mortal. But what if Daemon's ambition pushed him to seek a power that went beyond dragons, a power that defied death itself? The Night King, as we know, commands the forces of the dead. He leads an army of Whites and White Walkers, resurrecting the fallen to fight for his cause. His power over death mirrors the ambition and hunger for control that defined Daemon's life. Could it be that Daemon, always on the hunt for more power, discovered a way to transcend death, perhaps through dark magic unknown even to his kin? There's another angle to consider here: Daemon's mysterious disappearance or death. We know that many powerful figures in Westeros don't always meet their ends in ways that are final or straightforward. Daemon's story, with all its twists and turns, may not have concluded the way history tells us. What if after his supposed death, Daemon wasn't finished? What if he was drawn to the north, to the ancient magic that lies beyond the wall, and transformed into something far more sinister? One of the most obvious reasons this theory has gained traction is the undeniable physical resemblance between Daemon Targaryen and the Night King. Both figures are pale, with sharp, regal features that make them stand out. In House of the Dragon, Daemon's intense, almost otherworldly presence is palpable. His piercing eyes, angular face, and cold demeanor, particularly in moments of ruthlessness, draw a striking parallel to the Night King's icy countenance. Of course, physical resemblance alone isn't enough to base a theory on. But when combined with Daemon's characteristics, his thirst for power, his willingness to do whatever it takes to achieve his goals, and his deep connection to magic, the idea begins to take shape. It's important to remember that the Targaryens themselves are a family steeped in prophecy and magic. Their very blood is tied to ancient powers, powers that extend far beyond the dragons they rode. For Daemon, a man who always sought more, the pursuit of these powers might have led him to a darker path, a path that could have transformed him into the Night King we fear today. Daemon's actions throughout his life were defined by his ruthless ambition. He had a vision for the future of Westeros, one where he held power, whether through conquest or cunning. But his ambition also knew no bounds. It's not hard to consider the possibility of Daemon being tempted by immortality. For a man like him, death would be seen as the ultimate defeat, a barrier to the power and legacy he so desperately wanted to carve out. What better way to cheat death than to align oneself with the darkest of forces? The Night King, after all, was no ordinary foe. His actions were calculated, methodical, and driven by a purpose that remains shrouded in mystery. But one thing is clear: the Night King wasn't simply bent on destruction. His march southward had a purpose, one that feels eerily in line with Daemon's own desires for dominance. The Targaryens have always been associated with magic, specifically fire and dragons. But what if their connection to magic extended beyond that? What if some Targaryens, like Daemon, tapped into powers that lay dormant, forgotten by time? The Night King's ability to raise the dead and control the cold might suggest that he's a figure tied to ancient primal forces. Could Daemon, always in search of greater power, have been drawn to this magic? There are hints throughout Westerosi history that the Targaryens, despite their fiery nature, had dealings with powers beyond fire. The Valyrians, from whom the Targaryens descend, were known not just for their dragons, but for their extensive knowledge of magic. It's not entirely unthinkable that Daemon might have stumbled upon this knowledge, unlocking secrets that allowed him to transcend his mortal life. In this way, the Night King could be seen as Daemon's final act, a last grasp at power that surpassed even the might of dragons. The cold, like fire, is a force of nature, and for a Targaryen who sought control over the elements, perhaps it was only a matter of time before one of them reached for the cold too. If Daemon Targaryen did indeed become the Night King, what does that mean for the legacy of House Targaryen? The Targaryens have long been viewed as a house of conquerors, a family with fire in their veins. But if one of their own turned to the cold, it reframes the entire history of their bloodline. This theory doesn't just make Daemon a tragic figure, it makes him a central player in the ongoing battle between life and death, fire and ice. His transformation into the Night King could explain why the White Walkers are so methodical in their movements, why they seek not just to destroy, but to conquer. Perhaps the Night King's march toward the south wasn't just about eradicating the living, it was about reclaiming the power Daemon once held in life. The beauty of this theory is in its simplicity, but also in the tantalizing possibilities it opens up. Daemon Targaryen, a man known for his hunger for power, might have found a way to extend his influence beyond death, becoming the very force that would later threaten all of Westeros. Whether or not this theory holds truth, it speaks to the depth of Game of Thrones and the endless fascination we have with its characters, and their hidden motivations. In the end, if Daemon truly became the Night King, it would mean that the battle for Westeros was always a battle between two great powers: fire and ice, life and death, Targaryen and White Walker. Because in the world of Westeros, nothing is ever as it seems. Arya Stark's journey throughout Game of Thrones is one of the most transformative and captivating arcs in the series. From the young, rebellious girl who once roamed the halls of Winterfell to the faceless assassin trained by the mysterious House of Black and White in Braavos, Arya's path is defined by both survival and identity. But what if Arya Stark's story is more tragic than it appears? What if the Arya we see return to Westeros isn't Arya at all, but someone else entirely? A fan theory suggests that Arya Stark actually died during her time in Braavos, and that the figure we see post-Braavos is none other than the waif wearing Arya's face. It's a theory that, while shocking, makes a disturbing kind of sense when you dig into the details of Arya's transformation. Arya's time in Braavos was marked by close encounters with death. Whether facing off against the waif or enduring brutal training from the Faceless Men, Arya was repeatedly pushed to her limits, both physically and mentally. Her struggle to hold onto her identity while learning the ways of the Faceless Men was a battle of wills, with the central lesson being that she must become no one. But what if, in the process, she lost herself entirely? The theory posits that Arya was fatally wounded during her confrontation with the waif, more specifically, in their final encounter. In the scene where Arya is stabbed multiple times in the abdomen, she miraculously manages to survive and flee through the streets of Braavos. For many fans, this moment felt implausible, even in a world filled with dragons and magic. How could someone endure such grievous injuries only to recover and fight back with renewed strength? According to this theory, Arya didn't survive that stabbing. Instead, she succumbed to her injuries, and the waif, in keeping with the practices of the Faceless Men, took her face. The waif had long harbored a jealousy and resentment toward Arya, perceiving her as unworthy of the House of Black and White's teachings. By taking Arya's face, the waif not only succeeded in eliminating her rival, but also in becoming someone more powerful, a Stark of Winterfell. This idea is further supported by Arya's drastic personality change following her return to Westeros. The Arya we knew before Braavos was fierce, but still carried traces of her humanity. She was driven by vengeance, but she also had moments of compassion and connection, especially when it came to her family. Yet, after her time in Braavos, Arya's demeanor is colder, more detached. She seems to fully embrace the role of a killer, showing little emotion even when reuniting with her siblings. Consider her encounter with Sansa at Winterfell. The tension between the two sisters is palpable, and Arya's behavior during this period is unsettling. Her cold, calculating demeanor, her obsession with faces, and her willingness to confront Sansa in such a hostile manner all suggest that something fundamental has changed within her. Is this truly the Arya Stark we watched grow up? Or has the waif, now donning Arya's face, fully assumed her identity? Another key element of this theory lies in Arya's mission to become no one. Throughout her training in Braavos, Arya struggles with the idea of abandoning her identity. She clings to her Stark name and heritage, even as the Faceless Men try to strip her of everything that makes her Arya. The waif, on the other hand, appears to have no such struggle. She embraces the Faceless Men's teachings without hesitation, fully committing to the concept of being no one. If the waif were to take Arya's face, it would signify the culmination of that journey, the ultimate triumph of no one. By becoming Arya, the waif would not only claim her rival's face, but also her place in the world. She would have successfully erased her own identity and taken on the persona of one of the most significant figures in Westeros. But why would the waif return to Westeros as Arya Stark? The theory suggests that the waif's motives may have shifted after taking Arya's face. Perhaps, in assuming Arya's identity, she also assumed Arya's desire for revenge. After all, the Faceless Men are not driven by personal vendettas, but the waif, having worn Arya's face, may have inherited some of her emotions, desires, and even her memories. By the time she returns to Winterfell, the waif may no longer be acting purely as an assassin, but as someone with a personal mission, fulfilling Arya's list of names. This shift in identity could explain Arya's colder, more ruthless approach in the final seasons. She kills without hesitation, completing her mission with a single-minded focus that feels far removed from the Arya we once knew. Even her interactions with Jon Snow, one of the few people she deeply cared about, seem distant, as if she's struggling to connect with the person she used to be. One of the most chilling implications of this theory is the possibility that Arya Stark is truly gone, and that her family never realizes it. The waif, skilled in deception and mimicry, would be able to seamlessly integrate herself into the Stark family, carrying out Arya's plans while hiding the truth of her identity. It's a heartbreaking twist, but one that fits the darker, more tragic tone of Game of Thrones. There's also a deeper layer to consider when it comes to the Faceless Men. The House of Black and White is an ancient, secretive order with its own mysterious agenda. We know very little about their true goals or motivations, but what if Arya's journey was always meant to end this way? Perhaps the Faceless Men had a vested interest in Westeros, and by sending the waif to replace Arya, they ensured that they would have a powerful agent in the heart of the North. This theory, while grim, provides a compelling explanation for Arya's transformation in the later seasons. The girl who once struggled to reconcile her identity with the teachings of the Faceless Men may have been replaced by someone who fully embraced the idea of becoming no one. The waif, wearing Arya's face, would have the perfect cover, a beloved Stark returning home to complete a personal mission of vengeance. It's a chilling thought that the Arya we see slay the Night King, reunite with her family, and exact revenge on her enemies might not be Arya at all. If the waif truly took her place, it raises profound questions about identity, memory, and the nature of revenge. Did Arya's death in Braavos mark the end of her journey, only for the waif to step into her life and continue it under a new guise? In the end, the theory that Arya Stark is actually dead and has been replaced by the waif offers a dark and tragic reinterpretation of one of the show's most beloved characters. Whether or not this theory holds any truth, it adds another layer of complexity to Arya's story. A story that has always been about the struggle between identity and survival. The phrase, "there must always be a Stark in Winterfell," has echoed throughout the ages, whispered as both a reminder and a warning. For years, we've taken it at face value, a simple statement about Stark lineage, a way to ensure the family's hold over the North. But what if it means so much more? What if this ancient phrase speaks to a responsibility far greater than ruling the North? A duty passed down through generations of Starks, rooted in the very balance between life and death. A duty that was lost with the deaths of Rickard and Brandon Stark, triggering a chain of events that led to the resurgence of the White Walkers. This theory suggests that the Starks have always held a secret, a vital role in maintaining the balance between the living and the dead. It's not just about keeping a Stark in Winterfell for political reasons. It's about protecting the realm from an ancient force, a force that has threatened Westeros since the time of the First Men. The Stark bloodline may hold the key to preventing the return of the White Walkers, and when Rickard and Brandon Stark were executed by the Mad King, this knowledge, passed down for generations, was lost. With it, the protections that kept the dead at bay may have crumbled, allowing the Night King to rise once more. To understand this theory, we need to look back thousands of years, to the time of Bran the Builder, the legendary founder of House Stark. Bran is credited with constructing the Wall, a colossal barrier designed to keep the White Walkers and their undead army from descending upon Westeros. But Bran didn't do it alone. The legends say that he had the help of giants, the children of the forest, and ancient magic. This suggests that the wall wasn't just a physical structure, but a magical defense, one that required more than stone and ice to hold the dead at bay. And who better to maintain this magical barrier than the family who built it? The Starks have always had a deep connection to the North and its mysteries. Their lineage stretches back to the First Men, and they've ruled Winterfell for thousands of years, always guarding the North against threats both known and unknown. But what if their role went beyond ruling? What if the Starks were meant to serve as the guardians of a secret pact, an agreement forged long ago to keep the dead in their place? There must always be a Stark in Winterfell, could be a reminder of this sacred duty, a warning that if the Starks fail in their responsibility, the balance between life and death will be broken. Winterfell itself may hold the key to this balance. The castle is more than just a seat of power. It's a fortress steeped in ancient magic. Its very name, Winterfell, hints at a deeper meaning. Perhaps it marks the place where winter, symbolizing death, was felled or stopped. The Stark stronghold could be a focal point of the magic that keeps the White Walkers at bay, a kind of sacrificial altar or magical nexus that ensures the dead cannot cross into the realms of the living. If that's the case, then the presence of a Stark in Winterfell may be necessary to maintain this ancient defense. But what happens when that defense fails? When Rickard and Brandon Stark were killed by Aerys II, the Mad King, their deaths may have done more than weaken the political structure of the North. They may have shattered the ancient protections that kept the White Walkers at bay. Rickard, as the head of House Stark, may have been the last to carry the knowledge of these ancient rituals and safeguards. His execution, along with Brandon's, would have ended the line of Starks who understood the true nature of their family's responsibility. With their deaths, the knowledge was lost, and the safeguards may have crumbled, allowing the White Walkers to begin their slow march toward the Wall. Ned Stark, who took on the mantle of leadership after his father and brother's deaths, may have been unaware of this deeper duty. While he ruled Winterfell with honor and integrity, it's possible that he didn't understand the full extent of the Starks' ancient role in maintaining the balance between life and death. After all, Ned was a practical man, focused on the here and now. The ancient magic of the North, the mysterious crypts beneath Winterfell, and the legends of the White Walkers may have seemed distant and irrelevant to him. Without the knowledge that Rickard and Brynden carried, Ned was unable to fulfill the rituals or maintain the protections that kept the dead at bay. This theory redefines the importance of Winterfell's crypts, which have always been shrouded in mystery. The crypts are vast, with tunnels and tombs stretching far beneath the castle. The Starks have buried their dead there for centuries, and the crypts are often mentioned in both the books and the show as a place of significance. But what if the crypts hold more than just the bones of dead Starks? What if they contain relics, knowledge, or even magical artifacts related to the White Walkers and the ancient pact that Bran the Builder forged? The crypts could be the key to understanding the Starks' role in the battle between life and death. If Rickard and Brynden had access to this knowledge, their deaths would have been a catastrophic loss, not just for the Starks, but for all of Westeros. Without the proper rituals or the presence of a Stark who understands the true nature of their family's duty, Winterfell's defenses may have weakened, allowing the White Walkers to rise once more. The phrase, "there must always be a Stark in Winterfell," takes on a tragic new meaning in this light. It's not just about keeping a Stark in power, it's about maintaining the balance between life and death. The Stark bloodline, tied to the First Men and the ancient magic of the North, may be the only thing standing between Westeros and the return of the Long Night. The deaths of Rickard and Brynden, then, were not just acts of cruelty by the Mad King. They were the final blow that shattered the ancient protections that had kept the dead at bay for thousands of years. This theory adds a layer of tragedy to the Stark family's story. Rickard and Brynden were not just victims of Aerys's paranoia. They were the last bearers of a vital secret that could have prevented the rise of the White Walkers. Their deaths were more than just the end of a political dynasty. They were the loss of a sacred knowledge that had been passed down through generations of Starks. And without that knowledge, Westeros was left vulnerable to the greatest threat it had ever known. In the end, this theory forces us to rethink the Starks' place in the history of Westeros. They were not just rulers of the North. They were the guardians of a forgotten pact, the keepers of an ancient magic that held the forces of death at bay. And when that duty was forgotten, when the knowledge was lost, the dead began to rise once more. Bran Stark's journey throughout Game of Thrones is one of the most mystical and enigmatic. From the moment he falls from the tower in Winterfell, his story takes a turn that feels almost separate from the grounded political drama of the other characters. But what if that's because Bran Stark's story isn't happening in the same way we think? What if everything we've seen, from the battles for power to the march of the White Walkers, is nothing more than a dream? A vision seen through the eyes of a boy who, after his fall, remained trapped in an unconscious state, his mind constructing the epic tale we've all been watching. This theory suggests that Game of Thrones, with all its twists and turns, is not a chronicle of real events within its own universe, but rather the product of Bran's imagination, a dream unfolding while he lay unconscious after his fall. The idea that the entirety of Westeros is just a figment of one boy's mind is intriguing, unsettling, and oddly fitting for a series that constantly plays with themes of reality, prophecy, and fate. Let's start with Bran's powers as the three-eyed raven. After his fall, Bran begins to experience visions, glimpses of the past, present, and future. These visions are often disjointed and surreal, a mix of events that have already happened and those yet to come. The idea that Bran, in his comatose state, could be dreaming or imagining the events of the series is not far-fetched when you consider the nature of his powers. As the three-eyed raven, Bran is able to access timelines beyond his own, to witness events from every era of Westeros. This unique ability could very well mean that the story we're watching is one possible version of events, a version seen through the mind of a boy whose consciousness is drifting through time. The idea of the entire series being a dream ties into one of the oldest storytelling tropes, but it takes on new life within the world of Game of Thrones thanks to Bran's connection to time and fate. His fall from the tower, one of the first major events in the series, is a moment that shifts the entire story. It's the catalyst for much of the Stark family's misfortune, and it marks Bran's first step toward becoming the three-eyed raven. But what if, instead of setting these events into motion, Bran's fall did something else? It placed him in a state where his mind could wander freely, constructing an elaborate world where the fates of kings and queens, dragons and White Walkers are all part of his dream. There are clues throughout the series that support this theory. Bran's visions, for instance, often feel like pieces of a larger puzzle, fragments of a story that he's still trying to piece together. In some cases, these visions directly parallel events that later happen in the story, suggesting that Bran is either foreseeing the future or creating it in his mind. His journey to becoming the three-eyed raven is itself a mysterious and somewhat surreal experience, full of cryptic messages, symbolic imagery, and supernatural encounters. This blurring of reality and vision makes it plausible that the entire narrative is, in fact, taking place inside Bran's mind. The surreal elements of the series also lend themselves to this interpretation. From the prophetic dreams of characters like Daenerys and Jon Snow, to the symbolic imagery of the weirwood trees and the ancient magic of the children of the forest, Game of Thrones is filled with moments that feel dreamlike, as though they belong to a reality just slightly removed from the one we think we know. Bran's role as a seer who can access these moments, these alternate timelines and potential futures, suggests that he could be dreaming up everything we see, perhaps as a way to cope with the trauma of his fall. Another point in favor of this theory is the way Bran's personality changes after his fall. The Bran Stark we meet at the beginning of the series is a curious, adventurous boy, eager to explore the world around him. But after his accident, Bran becomes much more introspective, almost distant. As he gains more knowledge of the world through his powers, he becomes increasingly detached from the people around him, as though he is more connected to the dreamlike world of his visions than to the real world. This could be seen as a sign that Bran is retreating further into his mind, losing himself in the dream he's created. The idea that Game of Thrones is Bran's dream also helps explain some of the more fantastical and unlikely events in the series. The rise of Daenerys Targaryen as the Mother of Dragons, for instance, is a story that feels almost too epic to be real, more like a tale from legend than something that could happen in a grounded, political world like Westeros. The same could be said for Jon Snow's resurrection, the existence of White Walkers, and even the massive battles that unfold throughout the series. These events, while thrilling and dramatic, often feel larger than life, as though they're part of a story being imagined by someone with a mind full of fantasies and ancient prophecies. In this light, Bran's dream isn't just a random collection of events. It's a reflection of the stories and legends that have shaped his world. Growing up in Winterfell, Bran would have been surrounded by tales of heroic ancestors, ancient magic, and the great battles of the past. His dream, then, could be seen as his way of making sense of these stories, combining them with his own experiences to create a world where dragons fly, White Walkers march, and ancient prophecies come true. But what about the ending? The fact that Bran ends up on the Iron Throne at the conclusion of the series has always been a point of contention for fans. Many wondered how a character who spent most of the story in the background could suddenly emerge as the ruler of Westeros. If we accept the theory that the entire story is Bran's dream, his ascension to the throne makes perfect sense. After all, in a dream, the dreamer is often at the center of the story, even if they don't appear to be. Bran's rise to power could be the subconscious culmination of his journey, a way for his mind to resolve the story he's been telling himself. The theory also raises questions about the nature of reality in Game of Thrones. If everything we've seen is simply a product of Bran's imagination, does that make it any less real? In a world where magic, prophecy, and visions are part of the fabric of reality, the lines between what is real and what is imagined are often blurred. Bran's dream could be seen as one possible version of events, an alternate timeline that exists alongside countless others, each with its own outcome. This theory doesn't just change the way we view the events of Game of Thrones. It recontextualizes the entire series as a meditation on the power of storytelling, memory, and fate. Bran, with his ability to see the past, present, and future, is not just a passive observer of events. He is the creator of them. His dream is the story we've been watching, and in that dream, he holds the power to shape the destiny of Westeros. Ultimately, whether or not this theory holds any truth, it offers a fascinating perspective on the series. If Game of Thrones is Bran's dream, it raises profound questions about the nature of power, identity, and the stories we tell ourselves. Is the world we've been watching simply the product of a boy's imagination? And if so, what does that say about the characters and events we've come to know? What do we really know about the Targaryens? They've ruled with fire and blood. They've commanded dragons, and their family history is as legendary as it is mysterious. But beneath the surface of their iconic silver hair and their ability to ride dragons lies an even bigger question. How did they manage to preserve these traits for so long? For generations, the Targaryens practiced inbreeding, brother marrying sister, cousin marrying cousin, an ancient custom they carried over from old Valyria. While most families in Westeros would see such unions as taboo, for the Targaryens, it seemed necessary. And that's where this theory comes in. Some fans believe that the Targaryens weren't just following tradition. They had to marry within their family to retain the very traits that made them so powerful. It's a theory that raises more questions than answers. Unlike other noble families in Westeros, the Targaryens show little evidence of the typical problems that arise from inbreeding, like genetic defects or physical deformities. The only recurring issue that seems to haunt their bloodline is madness. But why? What makes the Targaryens immune to the physical consequences that destroyed so many real-world dynasties? It might just be because their bloodline isn't like anyone else's. In fact, the theory goes even further, suggesting that Targaryen genetics are unique, and inbreeding may be the only way to keep their connection to dragons and magic alive. When we look at history, inbreeding among royal families almost always leads to disaster. Take the Habsburg dynasty, for instance. Centuries of intermarriage led to devastating genetic defects, such as the infamous Habsburg jaw. And yet, generation after generation of Targaryens seem to emerge relatively unscathed. The theory suggests that their survival wasn't just luck or chance. Something in their bloodline made them different, made them stronger, and perhaps made them immune to the worst effects of inbreeding. Madness, though, seems to be the one curse that follows them. The Targaryen madness is legendary, often whispered about in the shadows of Westeros. King Aerys II, the Mad King, may be the most famous example, but he wasn't the only one. Still, for the Targaryens, this madness might not just be a side effect of their bloodline. It could be the price they pay for keeping their power. This theory becomes even more intriguing when you consider the children born to Targaryens who marry outside the family. Take Jon Snow, for example. Though he has Targaryen blood through his father, Rhaegar, Jon looks and acts far more like a Stark. The same could be said for Rhaenyra Targaryen's sons, who lack the iconic Targaryen features despite her lineage. Each time a Targaryen child is born from a union with someone outside the family, the distinctive traits, the silver hair, the dragon-riding abilities, seem to fade or disappear entirely. This pattern suggests that the Targaryen bloodline is somehow diluted when they mix with other families. It's almost as if their most important traits are tied to the purity of their blood. The theory posits that only by keeping the bloodline pure can the Targaryens preserve what makes them special, their connection to dragons and magic. Inbreeding, then, wasn't just a tradition, it was a necessity, and the only way to ensure that their descendants could continue to ride dragons was to keep the bloodline within the family. But why would the Targaryens lack the natural aversion to incest that most families have? It's a biological instinct meant to prevent the genetic issues that arise from inbreeding. Yet, the Targaryens seem completely immune to this instinct, embracing the practice with open arms for centuries. This strange immunity to the dangers of inbreeding, combined with their almost supernatural traits, suggests that their bloodline is fundamentally different from other families. It's not just about power, it's about survival. For the Targaryens, it may not be a matter of choosing power over morality, but rather the only option they have to maintain their legacy. Their dragons, their connection to magic, their very identity as a family, it all depends on their blood. And for them, preserving that bloodline seems to be worth the risk of madness. After all, it's a small price to pay to remain tied to the very magic that sets them apart from everyone else. This theory could explain why the Targaryens have survived for so long, despite the risks involved. It might also help us understand the true nature of their madness. Perhaps it's not just the result of inbreeding, but something far more profound. The Targaryen connection to dragons and magic could come with a cost, madness as the price for power. To wield such immense power, to command creatures as mighty as dragons, may require a bloodline that's more than human. This brings us to the heart of the theory. The Targaryen madness may not just be an unfortunate side effect, it could be the result of their magical heritage. The Valyrians, from whom the Targaryens descended, were known for their mastery of magic and their experiments with bloodlines. It's possible that the Targaryens' ancestors manipulated their own genetics, ensuring that future generations would be able to ride dragons and wield magic. But in doing so, they may have also passed down a darker legacy, the madness that comes with such immense power. In a way, the Targaryen bloodline is both their greatest strength and their greatest curse. Their ability to ride dragons and command magic sets them apart, making them one of the most powerful families in Westeros. But this power comes with a price: madness, the constant threat of losing control, the risk of their bloodline becoming diluted if they stray too far from their roots. For the Targaryens, inbreeding isn't just about keeping their bloodline pure, it's about maintaining their identity as a family tied to dragons and magic. And while the rest of Westeros might see their practice of marrying within the family as dangerous or immoral, for the Targaryens, it's simply the price they must pay to keep their power. Ramsay Bolton is easily one of the most hated characters in Game of Thrones. His sadistic, violent behavior, his relentless cruelty, and his thirst for power made him a villain everyone loved to despise. But what if everything we thought we knew about Ramsay was wrong? What if beneath his brutal exterior, Ramsay was secretly working for the very family he seemed hell-bent on destroying, the Starks? It's a wild theory, but one that suggests Ramsay was playing a long game, not for the Boltons or himself, but as a double agent working to bring down his own house and help the Starks regain control of the North. A master manipulator, cunning and ruthless, Ramsay may have been far more complex than we gave him credit for. Could it be that his seemingly random cruelty was part of a larger plan to return the North to its rightful rulers? Let's take a closer look. Ramsay's reputation as a skilled hunter and tracker is well established. He's not just a mindless killer, he's a man who knows how to track, stalk, and find his prey with deadly precision. So, when Bran and Rickon Stark went into hiding after escaping Winterfell, it seemed odd that Ramsay, of all people, failed to find them. He had the resources, the skills, and the motivation to track down the Stark boys, and yet he came back empty-handed. Could it be that Ramsay knew exactly where Bran and Rickon were, but chose to let them go? Some fans believe that Ramsay, despite his public allegiance to House Bolton, was secretly working to help the Stark cause. By allowing Bran and Rickon to escape, Ramsay ensured that the Stark bloodline would survive, keeping the possibility of a Stark resurgence alive. After all, if Ramsay had truly been loyal to Roose Bolton and the Lannisters, wouldn't he have hunted down the Stark heirs with more determination? His failure to do so suggests that there may have been more to his motives than meets the eye. Another curious detail in Ramsay's story is his absence during the Red Wedding, one of the most pivotal and brutal events in the series. As we know, the Red Wedding was orchestrated by the Freys, the Boltons, and the Lannisters to wipe out the Stark family and end their rebellion. Given Ramsay's reputation for ruthlessness, it's surprising that he wasn't involved in the massacre. His absence during the event allowed him to distance himself from the Freys and the Lannisters, keeping his hands clean of the bloodshed. Was this a strategic move? Perhaps Ramsay's absence wasn't just coincidence. It may have been a calculated decision to keep him from being directly tied to the massacre, preserving his ability to switch sides later on. Then there's Theon Greyjoy, or Reek as Ramsay cruelly renamed him. Ramsay's torture and mutilation of Theon are some of the most disturbing moments in the series, cementing Ramsay's place as a monstrous figure. But what if his treatment of Theon wasn't as straightforward as it seemed? Some fans speculate that Ramsay's infamous act of castrating Theon may not have actually happened. Instead, Ramsay may have allowed Theon to believe he had been mutilated as part of a psychological game designed to break him without physically maiming him. By keeping Theon alive and broken, Ramsay could maintain his cover as a sadistic tyrant while manipulating Theon to serve his own ends. This psychological torture, while horrific, may have been less about cruelty for cruelty's sake and more about ensuring Theon's survival as a pawn in the larger game. Ramsay's most telling action, however, may be his decision to kill his father, Roose Bolton, along with Walder Frey and their newborn son. On the surface, it seems like a classic Ramsay move: eliminate his rivals to secure his own position. But if we look deeper, the act weakened the Bolton-Frey alliance, destabilizing the very power structure that had allowed the Boltons to rise in the north. With Roose dead, Ramsay had effectively severed the Boltons' strongest connection to the Lannisters and the Freys, setting the stage for the eventual downfall of both houses. Ramsay's ruthless behavior wasn't random. It was calculated. By killing Roose, Ramsay not only ensured that his father's plans for the North would fail, but also made it easier for the Starks to reclaim their home. Without Roose's cunning and political alliances, the Boltons were vulnerable, and Ramsay's reckless leadership would only further weaken their position. In this light, Ramsay's patricide seems less like a power grab and more like a strategic move to sabotage his own house from within. Ramsay's actions during the Battle of the Illegitimate Sons further support the idea that he may have had a hidden agenda all along. During the battle, Ramsay had the perfect opportunity to kill Jon Snow, the key figure in the Stark resurgence. And yet, despite his skill as an archer, Ramsay never takes the shot. Instead, he lets Jon get close, almost inviting a direct confrontation. His tactics in the battle are reckless, allowing Rickon Stark to run toward Jon, knowing full well that Jon would abandon all strategy to save his brother. Ramsay's decision to toy with Rickon and ultimately kill him seems designed to provoke Jon into a face-to-face fight rather than to ensure a Bolton victory. It's as if Ramsay wanted the battle to end in a decisive confrontation, knowing that Jon Snow, with the help of the Vale army, would likely emerge victorious. By goading Jon into a reckless charge, Ramsay may have been ensuring the defeat of his own forces, clearing the way for the Starks to reclaim the North. His death, brutal as it was, could be seen as the final act of his long game, a sacrifice that ensured the Boltons' complete downfall and the return of Stark power. This theory paints Ramsay Bolton as a master manipulator, playing a game that only the most cunning could comprehend. Like Littlefinger, Ramsay may have been working behind the scenes, using his reputation as a sadistic tyrant to hide his true intentions. His cruelty, while real, may have been carefully calculated to maintain his cover, ensuring that no one suspected his true allegiance. Could Ramsay Bolton, the most hated man in Westeros, have been a double agent all along, It's a theory that forces us to reconsider everything we thought we knew about him. His brutal acts of violence, his manipulation of Theon, his patricide, and his actions during the Battle of the Illegitimate Sons all take on new meaning when viewed through the lens of this theory. Perhaps Ramsay wasn't just a monster, he was a mastermind, quietly working to return the North to its rightful rulers. Dragons were the cornerstone of Targaryen power, massive, fire-breathing creatures that could turn the tide of any battle and establish dominance over entire kingdoms. From Aegon the Conqueror's rise to the eventual Targaryen dynasty in Westeros, dragons were the ultimate symbol of strength and control. But something curious happened over time. The dragons grew smaller, weaker, and less formidable. By the time Daenerys Targaryen's ancestors ruled the Iron Throne, the once mighty beasts had been reduced to little more than oversized lizards. What if this wasn't just a natural decline? What if there was a hidden force behind the shrinking of dragons, a calculated effort to diminish Targaryen power and restore control to the ruling houses of Westeros? A fan theory suggests that the Maesters, a secretive and influential order of scholars, were the true architects behind the gradual weakening of dragons. Could it be that the Maesters, skeptical of magic and loyal to the political houses they served, orchestrated a conspiracy to rid Westeros of its most dangerous creatures? To understand this theory, we need to consider the Maesters themselves. They are an order dedicated to knowledge, healing, and science. For centuries, they have served as advisors to noble families across Westeros, shaping decisions and subtly influencing the direction of the realm. But the Maesters are also known for their skepticism toward magic, seeing it as an unpredictable and uncontrollable force that threatens the stability of the realm. And nothing in Westeros is more magical or more dangerous than dragons. The Targaryens, with their dragons, were outsiders in Westeros. Their arrival marked the beginning of a new age, one where a single house could rule through sheer force, thanks to their control over these monstrous creatures. The Maesters, whose influence rested on the stability of the great houses and their ability to guide rulers, likely saw the Targaryens and their dragons as a threat to the balance of power. If dragons remained dominant, the need for political alliances, careful negotiations, and the subtle influence of advisors would be diminished. Why rely on diplomacy when you can conquer your enemies with fire and blood? The theory suggests that the Maesters, who were embedded in nearly every noble house in Westeros, began a quiet conspiracy to weaken the dragons over time. They couldn't destroy them outright, but they could undermine them in other ways, through selective breeding, poor nutrition, and subtle manipulation. The goal: to shrink the dragons, making them less of a threat and weakening the Targaryen stranglehold on power. One of the most compelling pieces of evidence for this theory is the shrinking of dragons over time. When the Targaryens first arrived in Westeros, their dragons were enormous, fearsome beasts capable of leveling entire cities. Balerion the Black Dread, the largest and most powerful dragon in Westeros, spent much of his early life in Valyria, where dragons were free to grow to their full potential. But once the Targaryens established themselves in Westeros, the dragons began to shrink. Each generation of dragons was smaller and weaker than the last, until eventually they were little more than a shadow of their former selves. Could this decline have been the result of Maester interference? The Maesters, who were responsible for the care of the dragons and had access to their food, housing, and breeding, would have had plenty of opportunities to influence their growth. By providing poor nutrition, limiting their exercise, and controlling their breeding, the Maesters could have slowly but surely weakened the dragons, ensuring that each generation was smaller and less dangerous than the last. There's also the matter of selective breeding. Dragons, like any other creatures, can be bred for specific traits. By controlling which dragons were allowed to breed and ensuring that only the smallest, weakest dragons passed on their genes, the Maesters could have deliberately shrunk the dragon population over time. And because dragons were so closely tied to Targaryen power, weakening the dragons meant weakening the Targaryens themselves. The Maesters' connection to the powerful political houses of Westeros, particularly the Hightowers, adds another layer to this theory. Old Town, the seat of House Hightower, is also the home of the Citadel, where the Maesters are trained. This proximity suggests a close relationship between the Hightowers and the Maesters, one that could have been used to further a shared agenda. The Hightowers, like many other noble houses, had reason to fear the Targaryens' unchecked power. If the Maesters were looking for allies in their mission to shrink the dragons, the Hightowers would have been natural partners. Otto Hightower, a key figure in House of the Dragon, may have been involved in this conspiracy. As Hand of the King and one of the most politically savvy characters in the series, Otto would have understood the danger posed by the Targaryens and their dragons. It's possible that Otto, working with the Maesters, helped orchestrate a plan to weaken the dragons as part of his long-term political machinations. By reducing the Targaryens' power, Otto could have secured a more favorable position for his own family, particularly his daughter Alicent and her children. The idea that the Maesters were quietly working behind the scenes to shrink the dragons also fits with their larger worldview. The Maesters are deeply skeptical of magic, seeing it as a threat to the rational order they seek to maintain. Dragons, as creatures of pure magic, represent the ultimate challenge to their authority. By diminishing the dragons, the Maesters could ensure that the realm would rely on human power, political houses, armies, and alliances, rather than magical creatures. In this way, the Maesters could maintain their influence over the rulers of Westeros, shaping the direction of the realm without the unpredictable threat of dragons. If this theory is true, it recontextualizes the Maesters as far more than just advisors or healers. They become key players in the political machinations of Westeros, quietly influencing events to ensure the dominance of human power over magical forces. Their loyalty, it seems, was not to any one house or ruler, but to their own order and the rational, ordered world they sought to create. The shrinking of the dragons didn't just weaken the Targaryens, it weakened magic itself. By diminishing the dragons, the Maesters may have played a role in the decline of magic in Westeros, ensuring that the world would be ruled by men and their ambitions, not by magical creatures or ancient forces. And in doing so, they may have set the stage for the eventual rise of the political houses that would dominate Westeros for centuries to come. This theory forces us to reconsider the role of the Maesters in Westerosi history. Were they merely passive advisors, or were they active participants in shaping the fate of the realm? If they did conspire to shrink the dragons, Their influence over the course of events becomes far more significant than we ever realized. They were the hidden hand guiding the direction of Westeros, quietly ensuring that the realm remained in the control of men and not in the fiery grip of dragons. Bran Stark's journey from a curious boy climbing the towers of Winterfell to the enigmatic figure sitting on the Iron Throne is one of the most dramatic transformations in Game of Thrones. But what if Bran's rise to power wasn't his own doing? What if his ascension to the throne was orchestrated by someone else, someone who had been planning it for centuries? According to this fan theory, Bran Stark wasn't just a passive player in the Game of Thrones. Instead, he was possessed by Brynden Rivers, the three-eyed raven, who used Bran as a vessel to achieve his own ambitions and secure control over Westeros. It's a theory that casts Bran's story in a much darker light. No longer is Bran the wise, all-seeing green seer, chosen to help guide Westeros into a new age of peace. Instead, he becomes a pawn in a much older and more calculated game, a game played by Brynden Rivers, a Targaryen illegitimate son with his own deep ties to the political machinations of the past. Let's start with one of the most intriguing pieces of evidence: Bran's own words. After he fully assumes the role of the three-eyed raven, Bran tells those around him that he is no longer Bran Stark. This statement is more than just a reflection of his newfound powers. It's a clue that his identity has fundamentally changed. The Bran we once knew, the boy who cared deeply for his family and his home, is gone. In his place stands a cold, detached figure who seems far more concerned with the larger picture than with the fate of his own house. But what if this change wasn't just a natural evolution? What if Bran's mind and body had been taken over by Brynden Rivers, the former three-eyed raven who had been living in the roots of the weirwood tree for centuries? Brynden, also known as Blood Raven, was no ordinary green seer. He was a powerful sorcerer, a Targaryen illegitimate son with deep connections to both magic and political intrigue. As the three-eyed raven, he had the ability to see across time and manipulate events to his advantage. And when he found Bran, he may have seen the perfect opportunity to continue his influence over Westeros, using Bran as a vessel to further his own ends. This theory hinges on the idea that Brynden's interest in Bran was never purely benevolent. Throughout his training, Bran is told that he will become the new three-eyed raven. But the nature of this transformation is left deliberately vague. Was Bran simply meant to inherit Brynden's knowledge and abilities? Or was he intended to become a new host for Brynden's consciousness? The fact that Bran's identity seems to fade away as he embraces his role as the three-eyed raven suggests that Brynden's influence may have been far stronger than we realize. Brynden Rivers himself is a fascinating figure, and his backstory provides key insights into why he might have sought to possess Bran. As a Targaryen illegitimate son, Brynden grew up surrounded by the politics of the royal family. But his loyalties were never straightforward. He was a green seer, a sorcerer, and a man with his own ambitions. During his life, Brynden had strong ties to both the Blackwoods and the Targaryens, two families with a long history of conflict with the Brackens and other noble houses. His deep knowledge of magic, combined with his political savvy, made him a formidable figure, and it's likely that his motivations extended far beyond simply guiding a young boy to become the next three-eyed raven. The idea that Brynden used Bran as a vessel is eerily similar to other stories of possession in Westeros, where powerful magical beings take over the bodies of mortals to continue their influence. Bran, with his innate warging abilities, would have been a prime candidate for such a takeover. As a Stark, he had the blood of the North flowing through his veins, and as a Greenseer, he possessed the ability to transcend time and space. Brynden, who had spent decades honing his own powers, may have seen Bran as the perfect host, a way to ensure that his own influence would continue long after his physical body had decayed. This theory also draws an interesting parallel to the character of Doctor Strange in Avengers: Infinity War, where he uses his ability to see across timelines to identify the one path that leads to victory. Brynden, as the three-eyed raven, may have done something similar. With his ability to see the past, present, and future, Brynden could have manipulated events to ensure that one particular timeline, Bran's coronation, would come to pass. Every event, every decision may have been carefully orchestrated by Brynden, using Bran as a puppet to achieve his ultimate goal, securing control over Westeros. Bran's actions in the final seasons of Game of Thrones seem to support this theory. As the three-eyed raven, Bran is disturbingly passive. He shows little emotion, offers cryptic advice, and remains detached from the personal struggles of those around him. His decision-making process is equally mysterious. He does not intervene in key moments where his power could have saved lives or altered the course of the war. Instead, he seems to be playing a long game, waiting for the right moment to make his move. And when that moment comes, it's not the survival of the Starks or the defeat of the White Walkers that seems to matter most to him. It's his ascension to the Iron Throne. For someone who claims to have no desire for power, Bran's acceptance of the crown is curious. He never once protests the idea, nor does he show any hesitation in accepting his new role as ruler of Westeros. This, combined with his earlier statement that he is no longer Bran Stark, raises the question, who is Bran now? If Brynden Rivers truly possessed Bran, it would explain why Bran shows no emotional attachment to his family or to his role as king. The man sitting on the Iron Throne may not be Bran at all, but Brynden, continuing his quest for power through a new host. The theory also recontextualizes Brynden's long-standing feud with the Brackens. As both a Targaryen and a Blackwood, Brynden was deeply involved in the power struggles between these families. His rise to power through Bran could be seen as a final victory over his enemies, a way to cement his influence in Westeros and ensure that the legacy of the Blackwoods and Targaryens continues to shape the realm. If this theory is true, it raises some chilling possibilities for the future of Westeros. Bran's possession by Brynden could set up a final confrontation between Jon Snow and the three-eyed raven, now ruling through Bran's body. Jon, who was always suspicious of Bran's transformation, could be the one to uncover the truth, leading to a battle not just for the fate of Westeros, but for Bran's very soul. In the end, this theory transforms Bran's story from one of survival and wisdom to a tale of manipulation and possession. Brynden Rivers, the three-eyed raven, may have found the perfect host in Bran, using his powers to control the future of Westeros from behind the scenes. It's a twist that casts the entire ending of Game of Thrones in a new light, forcing us to question whether the true ruler of Westeros is Bran Stark or someone far more ancient and cunning. Dorne has always been the most enigmatic of the Seven Kingdoms, a land of sun, sand, and secrecy. Its people are known for their fierce independence, their exotic customs, and their defiance of both the Iron Throne and the expectations of the rest of Westeros. But what if the entire kingdom of Dorne was nothing more than a grand illusion? A clever deception designed to fool the other kingdoms, avoid conquest, and secure a seat at the table of Westerosi power without ever truly being a legitimate realm? It's a bold theory, but one that suggests Dorne never really existed in the way we've been led to believe. Instead, it was a fabrication, a ruse pulled off by clever traders, merchants, and guerrilla fighters to convince the rest of Westeros that Dorne was a formidable kingdom. In reality, the theory goes, Dorne was nothing more than a collection of nomads and raiders, using the harsh deserts of the south as a natural defense and employing guerrilla tactics to frustrate invaders like the Targaryens. The real Dorne, if this theory holds true, was a mirage. Let's start with the most striking aspect of this theory: Dorne's ability to resist conquest, particularly during the Targaryen reign. Despite being one of the least populous regions in Westeros, Dorne somehow managed to avoid being fully conquered by Aegon the Conqueror and later by Daemon I, the young dragon. In both cases, the Dornish used guerrilla warfare to harry and frustrate their enemies, disappearing into the vast deserts and launching surprise attacks before retreating into the shadows. But if Dorne never had a true standing army, how could they have resisted not one, but two Targaryen invasions? The answer, according to this theory, is simple. There was no kingdom to conquer. The idea that Dorne existed as a unified, organized realm may have been an illusion, one crafted to keep the Targaryens and other potential conquerors at bay. Instead of fighting a centralized kingdom with castles, armies, and a structured nobility, the invaders were actually facing small bands of nomads and raiders, using the natural terrain to their advantage. The harsh deserts of Dorne provided the perfect cover for these fighters, allowing them to strike and vanish before the Targaryens could retaliate. In this light, Dorne's resistance wasn't a show of strength. It was a calculated trick, playing on the perception of a powerful, untouchable kingdom, while hiding the truth of its disorganization. One of the most compelling pieces of evidence for this theory is the story of Daemon I's invasion. Daemon famously claimed to have conquered Dorne, but soon after his declaration, guerrilla fighters began to rise up, continuing the fight long after the kingdom was supposedly subdued. This suggests that there was no centralized power structure in Dorne to overthrow, no true kingdom to conquer. Instead, Daemon's forces were battling a decentralized network of fighters who could easily continue their resistance because they had no castles, no cities, and no nobility to lose. The capital of Dorne, Sunspear, plays a key role in this theory. Sunspear is said to be the seat of House Martell, the ruling family of Dorne. But what if Sunspear and, by extension, House Martell, was nothing more than a facade? According to this theory, Sunspear could have been a constructed city, a grand illusion built by rich traders and merchants to fool the rest of Westeros into believing Dorne was a legitimate kingdom. The idea is that Sunspear wasn't a true capital in the sense that King's Landing or Winterfell were, but rather a showpiece designed to give the appearance of power and stability. The nobles of Dorne, including the Martells, may have been little more than figureheads, their titles and positions invented to maintain the illusion of a kingdom. Oberyn Martell, one of the most beloved and memorable characters from Game of Thrones, adds an interesting layer to this theory. When Oberyn arrives in King's Landing, he does so with a surprising lack of pomp and circumstance. Unlike other highborn nobles, he doesn't travel with an entourage of bodyguards or courtiers. Instead, Oberyn arrives casually, almost as if he's indifferent to the usual trappings of power. Could this be because Oberyn, knowing the truth about Dorne, saw no need to maintain the charade in King's Landing? His easygoing demeanor and lack of formality could be seen as Oberyn laughing at the rest of Westeros, enjoying the fact that they were all buying into the illusion of Dorne's power, while he lived off their ignorance. If Dorne was merely a clever trick, it would also explain why we never see Dorne engage in large-scale battles or military campaigns throughout the series. The Dornish lords, pretending to be nobles, could have kept up appearances while relying on the natural defenses of the desert and the mobility of their nomadic fighters to fend off threats. While the rest of Westeros was focused on castles, armies, and alliances, Dorne survived by staying one step ahead, using deception and guerrilla tactics to maintain its autonomy. But why would Dorne go to such lengths to maintain this illusion? The answer could lie in the geopolitics of Westeros. By convincing the other kingdoms that Dorne was a legitimate power, the Martells and their allies would have been able to secure alliances, trade deals, and political influence without ever needing to fight large-scale wars. They could sit at the table with the great houses of Westeros, enjoying the benefits of power without ever having to truly earn it. And if the rest of Westeros believed in Dorne's strength, they would be far less likely to launch a serious invasion. This theory also redefines the relationship between Dorne and the rest of Westeros. If Dorne was never truly a kingdom, then its place in the Seven Kingdoms becomes far more complicated. It would mean that much of what we know about Dorne's history, its supposed conquest, its alliances, and its role in the political landscape of Westeros, was a lie. The real power in Dorne wouldn't have been in its castles or noble families, but in the desert itself, where nomads and raiders controlled the flow of goods, information, and people. In this light, Dorne becomes less of a traditional kingdom and more of a land of mystery and deception, where the real power lies not with lords and ladies, but with those who know how to survive in the desert's harsh environment. The Dornish lords, then, could be seen as actors in a carefully crafted illusion, using the wealth and resources of the desert's traders to fund their lifestyles, while the real power remained hidden among the dunes. If this theory is true, it completely changes how we understand Dorne's place in Westerosi history. What we thought was a powerful, independent kingdom may have been nothing more than smoke and mirrors, a ruse designed to fool the rest of Westeros into believing Dorne was something it wasn't. And for centuries, the deception worked, allowing Dorne to avoid conquest, maintain its autonomy, and secure a place in the political landscape of Westeros without ever truly existing as a legitimate realm. Aerys II Targaryen, known to history as the Mad King, is remembered for his paranoia, cruelty, and fiery obsession with destruction. His reign is defined by a slow descent into madness, culminating in his infamous cry to "burn them all" as Robert's rebellion came to a head. For years, fans have accepted that Aerys lost his grip on reality, consumed by fear and his own inner demons. But what if we've been misunderstanding Aerys all along? What if his seemingly mad actions weren't driven by insanity, but by a desperate attempt to protect the realm from an ancient, far greater threat? This theory challenges the widely accepted narrative of Aerys II and suggests that his obsession with fire and burning his enemies was actually a response to prophetic knowledge, a vision of the White Walkers, who had been lying in wait beyond the wall for centuries. According to this theory, Aerys's cry to burn them all wasn't the rambling of a madman. It was the frantic warning of a king trying to save his kingdom from a threat no one else could see. To understand the weight of this theory, we need to revisit the Targaryen connection to prophecy. Aegon the Conqueror, the founder of the Targaryen dynasty in Westeros, wasn't just a man of war and dragons. He was also said to have been driven by a prophetic vision. Aegon believed that a great threat would come from the north, a long night that would engulf the world in darkness. This vision, passed down through the Targaryen bloodline, is what spurred him to unite the Seven Kingdoms under his rule. The Targaryens believed it was their destiny to protect the realm from this coming danger. But what if Aerys inherited this knowledge? The theory suggests that Aerys, like Aegon before him, was aware of the prophecy regarding the Long Night and the White Walkers. The threat from the north was real, and Aerys may have become increasingly obsessed with preventing the rise of the dead. His fixation on fire and wildfire, his growing paranoia, and his desire to burn his enemies all take on a new meaning when viewed through this lens. Perhaps Aerys wasn't losing his mind. Perhaps he was consumed by the weight of prophecy and the fear that Westeros would fall to the White Walkers if drastic measures weren't taken. Aerys's obsession with wildfire, the deadly substance capable of incinerating anything in its path, becomes particularly significant in this context. Wildfire, with its intense heat and destructive power, would be a potent weapon against the undead, creatures that thrive in the cold and can only be destroyed by fire. If Aerys believed that the dead were coming, his hoarding of wildfire and his desire to set King's Landing ablaze could have been a desperate, last-ditch effort to stop the White Walkers before they could overrun Westeros. The most famous moment of Aerys's madness, his command to burn them all, takes on a haunting new significance in light of this theory. We've always assumed that Aerys was referring to the people of King's Landing, his own subjects whom he was willing to sacrifice rather than surrender to Robert Baratheon. But what if Aerys wasn't talking about the people of King's Landing at all? What if his words were meant for an unseen enemy, the army of the dead that was still lurking beyond the wall? Aerys may have believed that burning King's Landing, and possibly even all of Westeros, was the only way to prevent the Night King's forces from raising the dead and swelling their ranks. This theory reframes Aerys as a tragic figure, a man who was driven to the brink of madness not by paranoia or a thirst for power, but by the knowledge of a prophecy he couldn't escape. Imagine the weight of that responsibility, knowing that an ancient enemy, long forgotten by most of Westeros, was coming to destroy everything and feeling powerless to stop it. Aerys's increasingly erratic behavior could be seen as a symptom of his growing fear and desperation. His inability to convince anyone else of the impending threat left him isolated, and without support, he turned to the only solution he could think of: burn everything, leave nothing for the White Walkers to turn into whites. The fact that Aerys never explained his actions is one of the most intriguing aspects of this theory. If Aerys truly believed that the White Walkers were coming, why didn't he tell anyone? Why didn't he try to rally the realm to prepare for the coming storm? The answer may lie in the Targaryen family's history of secrecy and prophecy. Aerys may have thought that no one would believe him. After all, the White Walkers were little more than a myth by his time, a tale told to frighten children. His reputation as a paranoid ruler would have made it even harder for him to convince others that the danger was real. And so, like many Targaryen rulers before him, Aerys may have felt that the burden of the prophecy was his alone to bear. It's also possible that Aerys's increasing paranoia wasn't just a result of the prophecy itself, but of his own failure to act on it. The weight of knowing the future, combined with his inability to stop it, may have pushed him to the breaking point. By the time Jaime Lannister killed him, Aerys was a man consumed by his own fear, desperately trying to fulfill a prophecy that no one else understood. Jaime's murder of Aerys, in this light, becomes a far more tragic moment. He wasn't just killing a mad king. He may have been silencing the one person who knew how to stop the coming long night. If Aerys had succeeded in burning King's Landing, would the White Walkers have been stopped before their threat became real? This is perhaps the most haunting question raised by the theory. Was Aerys's extreme solution, however horrific, the only way to prevent the dead from rising? We'll never know for sure, but the idea that Aerys may have been acting out of a genuine desire to protect the realm casts his story in a much more sympathetic light. In the end, this theory doesn't just change the way we see Aerys II, it changes the way we understand the entire history of Westeros. If the Mad King wasn't mad at all, but rather a man driven to extreme measures by prophetic knowledge, then everything we thought we knew about the Targaryen dynasty comes into question. Aerys's obsession with fire, his increasing paranoia, and his final desperate act may not have been the ramblings of a madman, but the last stand of a king trying to save his people from a threat no one else could see. The White Walkers have long been portrayed as the ultimate villains of Game of Thrones. Icy, relentless, and seemingly bent on the destruction of all life, they represent an ancient force that rises from the shadows of the North to threaten everything and everyone in Westeros. But what if their true purpose isn't as simple as annihilation? What if the White Walkers are not just agents of chaos, but rather a necessary force of nature, tied to the balance of life and death in a way that is far more intricate than we realize? According to this theory, the White Walkers may serve a larger purpose, a purpose deeply connected to the natural order of Westeros. Their creation by the Children of the Forest wasn't just a desperate act of war, but part of a much more profound plan to maintain balance. It's a theory that asks us to reconsider everything we thought we knew about the White Walkers, not as mindless harbingers of death, but as beings with a mission that extends beyond mere destruction. To understand this theory, we need to revisit the origins of the White Walkers. The Children of the Forest, an ancient and mysterious race, created the White Walkers thousands of years ago to defend themselves against the first men who had invaded their lands. But as we learn later, the White Walkers became a threat to both the children and the first men alike. This backstory frames the White Walkers as a weapon that spiraled out of control, but it also raises questions about their intended role. Were the White Walkers simply a tool of war, or was there something more to their creation? The theory suggests that the White Walkers were not just created to kill, but to restore balance. Westeros is a land governed by seasons, long winters, harsh summers, and unpredictable weather patterns that seem almost supernatural in their extremity. The White Walkers, with their cold and ice, might be connected to this cyclical nature of the world. Just as the seasons shift, so too does the balance between life and death. Perhaps the White Walkers exist as a necessary force to reset this balance when it has been disturbed. Their methodical and calculated actions throughout the series seem to support this idea. The White Walkers are not reckless. They move with purpose, slowly gathering their army, preparing for their invasion of the South. Every step they take is deliberate, as though they are following a plan that we, the viewers, do not yet fully understand. This patience suggests that their goal is not mere destruction, but something far more profound. They aren't just looking to conquer, they are restoring some kind of order to the world. Their connection to the children of the forest also hints at a deeper purpose. The children were deeply tied to the natural world, wielding magic that was intrinsically linked to the land, the trees, and the cycles of nature. If the children created the White Walkers, it stands to reason that these icy beings would share some of that connection. In this light, the White Walkers can be seen not as unnatural, but as part of nature's way of maintaining equilibrium, like a wildfire that clears the forest to allow new growth. The White Walkers could represent a natural cleansing, a force that arises when the balance between life and death becomes skewed. This idea of the White Walkers as a necessary force is further supported by their ancient ties to the mystical elements of Westeros. The children of the forest are not the only ones with a deep connection to magic and nature. The North, with its endless snow and ice, has always been a land of ancient mysteries. The weirwood trees, the wall, and even the Stark family's ties to the direwolves and the old gods suggest that there is a deeper magic at play in the North, one that transcends the petty politics of men. The White Walkers, as beings of ice and winter, could be agents of this ancient magic, tasked with restoring balance when the world falls into chaos. What, then, is the deeper purpose of their invasion? If we view the White Walkers as more than simple villains, their actions take on new meaning. They don't just want to kill, they want to restore balance. The South has been embroiled in endless wars, with houses vying for power and tearing the realm apart. The rise of dragons, the use of wildfire, and the unchecked ambition of rulers like Cersei Lannister have all contributed to the growing instability in Westeros. The White Walkers, as agents of nature, may be responding to this imbalance, seeking to bring the cycle of death and rebirth back into alignment. In many ways, the White Walkers represent the ultimate counterbalance to the excesses of mankind. Where men are driven by ambition, greed, and a desire for power, the White Walkers act with cold precision, devoid of emotion or personal ambition. They are a force of nature, as inevitable as winter itself. Their invasion is not about domination, it's about restoring the world to a state of equilibrium, purging the excesses, and bringing about a new cycle of life and death. This theory also casts the Night King in a new light. Rather than being a tyrant or a conqueror, the Night King could be seen as the leader of this natural force, guiding the White Walkers in their mission to restore balance. His actions, while brutal, may be necessary to achieve this goal. The raising of the dead, for example, could be seen as a way to redress the imbalance between life and death, a reminder that death is a natural part of the cycle and that no one, not even the greatest kings or queens, can escape it. The White Walkers' calculated approach to battle further supports this interpretation. Their slow, deliberate march towards the south is not the behavior of an enemy hell-bent on destruction for destruction's sake. Instead, it mirrors the inevitability of winter itself. Just as the seasons change, so too must the balance between life and death. The Night King's army is a reminder that no matter how much power humans amass, they are still subject to the forces of nature. This theory also touches on the idea that the White Walkers are aligned with the mystical balance in Westeros. We see evidence of this balance in many aspects of the world, whether it's the shifting seasons, the cyclical rise and fall of dynasties, or the role of magic itself. Magic in Westeros is often portrayed as a double-edged sword, with great power coming at a great cost. The dragons, for example, represent fire and destruction, but their return also signals the return of the White Walkers, as if the balance between fire and ice, life and death, must always be maintained. The White Walkers' connection to the Children of the Forest also raises questions about the true nature of their conflict. If the children created the White Walkers, does that mean the White Walkers are inherently evil? Or were they simply a tool that, like all tools, can be used for both good and ill? Perhaps the true tragedy of the White Walkers is not that they were a mistake, but that their purpose was misunderstood. In their attempt to restore balance, they have been cast as villains, when in reality, they are simply fulfilling their role in the natural order. The idea that the White Walkers are part of a larger, more complex system of balance changes the way we view their invasion. They are not just an external threat to be defeated. They are a reminder of the fragility of human life and the inevitability of death. Their march southward is a reflection of the natural cycles that govern all life in Westeros. And just as winter eventually gives way to spring, so too must life give way to death and order be restored. This theory doesn't absolve the White Walkers of the terror they bring, but it reframes them as more than mindless monsters. They are an integral part of the world's natural order, and their invasion is as much about restoring that order as it is about conquest. In a world where fire, magic, and dragons have upset the balance, the White Walkers' arrival is a necessary counterbalance, an inevitable force that arises to restore harmony. Melisandre, the Red Priestess, is one of the most mysterious and polarizing characters in Game of Thrones. Driven by an unwavering faith in the Lord of Light, she dedicates her life to serving what she believes is a divine mission: to defeat the Great Other, the god of darkness and death, and usher in a new age of light. But what if everything she believed, everything she thought she was working toward, was a lie? What if instead of serving R'hllor, Melisandre was unknowingly working for the very force she sought to destroy? The theory that Melisandre was actually serving the Great Other suggests that her visions, her sacrifices, and even her influence over key events in Westeros were all part of a darker agenda, one that she herself may not have fully understood. It's a theory that reframes her role in the story and casts doubt on the very nature of the battle between light and darkness in the world of Westeros. At the heart of this theory is the idea that Melisandre's unwavering belief in her visions may have led her astray. Throughout the series, Melisandre interprets her visions as direct messages from the Lord of Light. She believes that R'hllor is guiding her, showing her the path to victory over the Great Other. But time and again, her visions are proven wrong, or at the very least, misleading. One of the most striking examples of this is her unwavering belief that Stannis Baratheon was the prophesied hero, Azor Ahai reborn, the one destined to defeat the darkness. Melisandre dedicates herself to Stannis, pushing him to make increasingly desperate decisions, all based on her belief that he is the chosen one. Yet, as we see, Stannis' campaign ends in disaster, and Melisandre's faith is shattered when she realizes she was wrong. But what if her visions weren't wrong? What if they were simply misinterpreted? If Melisandre was actually serving the Great Other, it would make sense that her visions were leading her toward outcomes that ultimately served the cause of darkness. The death of Stannis, the sacrifice of Shireen, and the countless other tragedies she contributed to could all be seen as part of a larger plan to sow chaos and death, exactly what the Great Other would want. Melisandre's willingness to sacrifice innocence is another key point in this theory. While she justifies these sacrifices as necessary for the greater good, her actions often seem to align more with the forces of darkness than with the light she claims to serve. The burning of Shireen in particular is one of the most horrific moments in the series, and it's difficult to reconcile such a cruel act with the idea that Melisandre is truly working for a benevolent god. In this moment, it becomes clear that Melisandre's faith is blind. She is so consumed by her belief in her mission that she is willing to commit atrocities in its name. This brings us to the question of whether R'hllor and the Great Other are as clearly divided as Melisandre believes. In her mind, the Lord of Light represents life, warmth, and salvation, while the Great Other embodies death, cold, and destruction. But what if these two deities are not as different as they seem? What if, rather than being polar opposites, they are two sides of the same coin, both manipulating humanity for their own purposes? The inconsistencies in Melisandre's actions and beliefs suggest that the line between R'hllor and the Great Other may be blurrier than we think. Throughout the series, we see Melisandre wield great power. She brings Jon Snow back from the dead, she commands fire, and she claims to see the future in the flames. But this power often comes at a great cost, and it is not always clear whether it serves the cause of good or evil. Fire, after all, is both a source of life and a destructive force. In Melisandre's hands, it becomes a tool of both salvation and death. Her frequent mistakes and moments of doubt also point to the possibility that she may have been deceived. Melisandre's faith is shaken multiple times throughout the series, particularly after Stannis' defeat and death. She questions whether she has been wrong all along, and though she eventually finds new purpose in serving Jon Snow, her uncertainty lingers. Could this doubt be a sign that Melisandre was never truly serving R'hllor, but was instead being used by a darker force, one that thrives on death and destruction? If Melisandre was indeed unknowingly serving the Great Other, it would explain many of the contradictions in her character. On the surface, she is a priestess of light, dedicated to fighting the darkness. But her methods often resemble those of the very force she claims to oppose. She brings death in the name of life, and her actions, while driven by faith, often lead to greater suffering. This theory also raises questions about the true nature of the battle between R'hllor and the Great Other. If Melisandre's story teaches us anything, it's that the conflict between light and darkness is not as straightforward as it appears. Both deities seem to use humanity as pawns in their cosmic struggle, with little regard for the individuals caught in the middle. Melisandre, in her blind devotion to R'hllor, may have unwittingly become an instrument of the Great Other, furthering the cause of death and destruction, even as she believed she was fighting against it. The fact that both R'hllor and the Great Other remain largely unseen throughout the series adds to the ambiguity. We never fully understand their motivations, and much of what we know about them comes from the interpretations of their followers. Melisandre, despite her immense power, is ultimately just a mortal trying to make sense of the divine. Her visions, while powerful, are open to interpretation, and in her desperation to serve a higher purpose, she may have been led astray by forces beyond her understanding. The theory that Melisandre was actually serving the Great Other also casts a shadow over her role in some of the most pivotal events of the series. Her resurrection of Jon Snow, for example, is seen as a miraculous act, a sign that the Lord of Light has a plan for Jon. But what if this act of resurrection was not a gift from R'hllor, but rather a manipulation by the Great Other? Bringing Jon back from the dead could have served a darker purpose, one that Melisandre was unaware of. After all, death and resurrection are key themes in the battle between light and darkness, and the line between the two is often blurred. In the end, the theory that Melisandre was unknowingly serving the Great Other adds a tragic layer to her character. She is a woman of immense power, driven by an unshakable belief in her cause, but ultimately, she may have been a pawn in a much larger game. Her faith, while genuine, blinded her to the possibility that she was being used by the very force she sought to defeat. This theory doesn't just change the way we view Melisandre, it changes the way we view the entire struggle between light and darkness in Game of Thrones. If the battle between R'hllor and the Great Other is not as clear-cut as it seems, then every action taken in their name becomes suspect. The defeat of the White Walkers in the Battle of Winterfell was supposed to be a moment of triumph, a victory that marked the end of an ancient evil and saved Westeros from the threat of eternal winter. But what if the White Walkers succeeded in ways we never anticipated? While their physical defeat was undeniable, some fans believe that their true victory came not on the battlefield, but in the psychological aftermath that followed. This theory suggests that even though the White Walkers were destroyed, their influence lingered, sowing discord, fear, and isolation among the survivors, ultimately leading to the fall of Daenerys Targaryen and the destruction of King's Landing. At first glance, this idea might seem far-fetched. After all, the White Walkers were wiped out in a single night, their army of the dead reduced to nothing when Arya Stark struck the fatal blow to the Night King. But the true damage caused by the White Walkers might not have been the physical destruction they wrought. It was the emotional and psychological toll they left behind. In particular, the death of Jorah Mormont, one of Daenerys' closest and most trusted advisors, had a devastating effect on her mental state, setting off a chain of events that would ultimately lead to the burning of King's Landing. Emilia Clarke, who portrayed Daenerys Targaryen, hinted at this in interviews, noting that Daenerys' sudden turn to violence in the final episodes was driven by her overwhelming sense of isolation. By the time she reached King's Landing, Daenerys had lost nearly all of her closest allies. Jorah's death during the Battle of Winterfell was a critical blow. He had been her most loyal supporter since the beginning of her journey, and his death left her emotionally unmoored. Without Jorah to ground her, Daenerys found herself increasingly isolated, surrounded by advisors like Tyrion and Varys, who began to question her decisions and loyalty. Jorah's role in Daenerys' life cannot be overstated. He was her protector, her confidant, and in many ways, her emotional anchor. Throughout the series, Jorah was the one person who always believed in her, who stood by her side even when others doubted her. His death during the battle wasn't just a personal loss for Daenerys. It was the moment she began to lose her sense of stability. Without Jorah's steady presence, Daenerys became more vulnerable to the paranoia and loneliness that had been building inside her. His death marked the beginning of her descent into madness, as she found herself increasingly surrounded by people she couldn't trust. The Battle of Winterfell itself was a traumatic event for everyone involved. But for Daenerys, the loss of Jorah was particularly devastating. As the White Walkers advanced, Daenerys fought with everything she had to protect those she loved. But in the end, she couldn't save the one person who had always protected her. Jorah died in her arms, and with him, Daenerys' last sense of emotional security may have died as well. From that moment on, she was adrift, relying on advisors like Tyrion and Varys, who were no longer fully aligned with her vision of the future. In this way, the White Walkers indirectly caused the destruction of King's Landing. Their attack on Winterfell forced Daenerys to make choices she might not have made otherwise. By taking away her most loyal supporter, they left her vulnerable to the doubts and suspicions that had been growing within her. Daenerys had always been driven by a desire to break the wheel, to liberate the people of Westeros and bring about a new era of justice. But without Jorah's influence, that dream began to unravel. Surrounded by advisors who questioned her leadership and increasingly isolated from those who had once supported her, Daenerys became consumed by her worst instincts. As Daenerys approached King's Landing, the isolation and paranoia that had been building since the Battle of Winterfell reached their breaking point. Her growing mistrust of those around her, fueled by Varys' betrayal and Tyrion's perceived failures, pushed her to make the fateful decision to burn the city to the ground. In this moment, the White Walkers' influence became clear. Though they had been physically defeated, their legacy of death and destruction lived on in the minds of those who survived. The fear, mistrust, and trauma left in the wake of their attack on Winterfell ultimately led to Daenerys' fall, fulfilling the White Walkers' goal of spreading chaos and death across Westeros. Jorah Mormont's death, then, can be seen as a key turning point in this theory. As Daenerys' last true friend, his loss left her without anyone to temper her more destructive impulses. Jorah had always been the one to offer her counsel when she faced difficult decisions, to remind her of her larger goals and keep her grounded in her humanity. Without him, Daenerys was left alone, isolated, and increasingly paranoid, and that isolation became the catalyst for her most catastrophic decision. This theory also extends beyond Daenerys, suggesting that the trauma of the Battle of Winterfell affected many of the key characters in Game of Thrones. Jon Snow, Arya Stark, and Sansa Stark all survived the battle, but they were forever changed by the experience. Jon, who had always been torn between his duty to the Night's Watch and his love for his family, was left struggling to find his place in the world after the battle. His relationship with Daenerys, already complicated by the revelation of his true parentage, became even more strained as he watched her descend into madness. Arya, who delivered the final blow to the Night King, may have triumphed on the battlefield, but she too was deeply affected by the trauma of the battle. The horrors she witnessed and the lives she took left her with a sense of emptiness, and her decision to leave Westeros at the end of the series could be seen as a response to the lingering effects of that trauma. Sansa, who had already endured so much throughout the series, emerged from the battle as a hardened ruler, but the scars of what she had survived remained. The White Walkers, then, were not just a physical threat, they were a psychological one. Even after their defeat, their influence continued to haunt the survivors, shaping their decisions and leading to the eventual downfall of Westeros's most powerful players. The fear, mistrust, and trauma that lingered in the aftermath of the Battle of Winterfell became the White Walkers' final, indirect victory. In the end, this theory forces us to reconsider the nature of the White Walkers' threat. While they were defeated in battle, their true success lay in the way they destabilized the key figures of Westeros, setting off a chain of events that led to even more death and destruction. Daenerys' decision to burn King's Landing wasn't just a moment of madness. It was the culmination of the White Walkers' influence, a final act of chaos that fulfilled their goal of spreading death across the realm. As we come to the end of our journey through the world of Game of Thrones fan theories, it's clear that the story we thought we knew still holds countless mysteries. From Daemon Targaryen's possible transformation into the Night King, to the idea that Bran Stark was merely a vessel for Brynden rivers, these theories show us that there is always more beneath the surface. More secrets, more possibilities, more unanswered questions. Even now, years after the final episode aired, fans continue to speculate, debate, and unravel the complexities woven into George R.R. Martin's world. But what is it about these theories that keep us so captivated? Why do we find ourselves returning again and again to the characters, the stories, and the possibilities they left behind? Perhaps it's because Game of Thrones was never just about battles and power struggles. It was about the human condition. It was about how individuals navigate the balance between honor and survival, between duty and desire, and how the choices they make ripple out, affecting not only their own lives, but the fate of entire kingdoms. In a world as richly built as Westeros, where magic and prophecy mingle with politics and betrayal, it's only natural that we would seek to understand more, to find answers in the shadows of what was left unsaid. Theories like the Maesters' conspiracy to shrink the dragons, or the possibility that the White Walkers achieved a subtler psychological victory after their defeat, help us dive deeper into the lore, inviting us to reimagine what we've seen and ask new questions about what it all means. These theories also remind us that in Westeros, nothing is ever quite as simple as it seems. The phrase, "there must always be a Stark in Winterfell," could hold a significance far greater than we ever imagined. The actions of the Mad King, Aerys II, might not have been born of insanity, but rather of desperate knowledge. And Daenerys Targaryen's fiery descent into madness may have been shaped as much by the lingering trauma of Winterfell as by her own tragic isolation. Each of these theories speaks to a fundamental truth about the world of Game of Thrones. It thrives on the unknown. The unknown drives the characters, haunts their dreams, and shapes the paths they take. And even as viewers, we are not immune to its pull. The mysteries that remain, whether in the crypts of Winterfell, in the mind of Bran Stark, or in the still, cold north, are part of what makes this story linger long after the final credits have rolled. In the end, perhaps that's the greatest legacy of Game of Thrones. Not the answers, but the questions. The theories that emerge from those questions serve as a reminder that stories are alive. They grow, evolve, and shift in the minds of those who consume them. The best stories, like the ones in Westeros, refuse to be confined by a single telling. They leave room for us to imagine new possibilities, to fill in the gaps with our own ideas, and to keep the conversation going long after the story itself has ended. And so, as we close this exploration of Game of Thrones fan theories, one thing is clear. Though the show may be over, the story is far from finished. The questions we've asked here, and the countless others we haven't even touched, will continue to inspire new theories, new debates, and new ways of looking at a world we thought we knew. Because in Westeros, nothing is ever quite as it seems.